Across town on Berlin Street, where the towns of Santa Rosa and Fulton rubbed against each other, Lucy and Herman sat at her vanity. She was at hard work popping a zit in the mirror. A breeze blew in through her windows, causing the white cotton curtains to rustle. Shivering, she got up from her stool and walked to the small balcony that looked down from the yard from her second-floor bedroom. The world lay still in the lamplight. The streets were empty of cars. The materials for her father's new garage sat in the driveway. Orange cones, sawhorse, lumber, and a lone dog moaned at the moon. And below, standing in her mother's prized petunias, was Jean Brennick. "Lucy," he shouted, waving his arms. Jean was tired of being alone. He was not good at people working solo. Some people didn't eat meat. Some people didn't watch horror movies. Some people didn't wear deodorant. Jean didn't do alone. Stepping out of the flower bed, he ran across the yard and climbed up onto Miss Herman's expensive brass bird bath to get a better view. Once he reached the top, he stopped waving his arms. It was difficult to stay up there, so he teetered with his arms at his side, bouncing like a giant drowsy pelican. "Jean," shouted Lucy, "what are you doing here?" Jean was about to answer when he felt a cold, slimy wetness on his ankle. Guessing it was one of his tentacles acting up, he slapped at his foot. Instead of a tentacle, he knocked away a slug. The small, blobby creature flew onto the driveway where it landed with a splat. "What is it, Jean?" she asked again. Again, Jean tried to open his mouth and felt a wet slug stuck to his ankle. "Gross," he shouted. "What's gross?" asked Lucy, leaning out the window. "Lucy," he called. Just then a slug on his shirt dropped onto the patch of skin between his shoe and his trouser leg. It felt like a soggy burrito. With a scream, Jean fell off the bird bath and landed in the grass. One of his tentacles snapped forward over his shoulder, scooped up the slug, and cradled it in his curved tip. The gray blob and the blue tentacle looked oddly similar. Then Jean began to understand what was going on. The slugs were chasing him because for some reason they were attracted to the tentacles. "Yuck," he shouted. He smacked his tentacle when the slug spitting into urine. "No matting allowed." "Lucy," Jean tried again. "I'm covered in slugs." Of course Lucy didn't make out what Jean was saying, since he was dancing around her yard, as if he were saying, since he was dancing around her yard, if he were saying, "We're walking on hot coals." "Your what?" she shouted back. "Your communist hugs?" "I'm covered in slugs," he yelled again. "Your oven is sludged?" Lucy shouted back, shaking his head in frustration. Jean walked over to the driveway. He picked up one of his orange cones the construction workers had left behind. Using it like a megaphone, he shouted up to Lucy, "I'm covered in slugs and it's nasty and I hate it," he screamed out loud as he could. The sound echoed across the cul-de-sac. "I hate that Vince punched me in the face and that my dad was some alien who grew up in Michigan." Several front porch lights flickered on, but Jean kept shouting, most of all, I hate that I have a bunch of tentacles sticking out of me. One is trying to feed me stuff, and there's this one that's always sticking books in my face. If I want to read something, I'll go to a library, thank you very much." It was Lucy's turn to wave her arms now as she tried to get him to stop yelling. The entire neighborhood was stirring. People were walking up. Windows were opening. "Be quiet," Lucy hissed down at him. "Keep your voice down." But Jean was tired of keeping his voice down. Being polite was out of the question when all you are alone and no one wanted to listen to you. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he shouted when he lowered his voice a bit. "It's just like Vince always said. I should think about what I do before I do it. How does he put it? Considering the consequence is awesome." He turned away and feverishly shook his head, mumbling, "That is the worst catastrophe ever." "What are you trying to say, Jean?" asked Lucy. Jean's face was totally blank. "I came here to say I'm sorry." Leaning on the railing, Luce gazed down at he stood surrounded by broken bricks and power tools. Is that all you want? She asked. Jean has always thought he'd have a lot to say to Lucy if the opportunity presented itself. After all, he'd had a crush on her for a long time. Whenever he thought about a girl, whenever it was giving one kiss on the check of or asking one for the key to a gas station bathroom, he pictured Lucy. He was what he thought a girl should be: pretty, nice, smart, and funny. Even now, Jean couldn't help smiling when he saw her. But now that time had come. He didn't know what to say any of it. Kissing you was awesome, he said. Let's do it again. I don't think so, Jean, said Lucy. We kissed for like half an hour, said Jean. It was great. We kissed once, and for like 5 seconds. So, said Jean. It was cool, wasn't it? Lucy hugged herself. It looked like she was even thinking about walking back inside. She didn't. Yes, she said at last. Okay, Jean said with a smile. Good. Not sure what else to do. He turned to walk away. Before he reached the end of the driveway, something occurred to him, and he stopped. Turning around, he lifted the orange cone back into his mouth. Hey, he shouted. Maybe it was the fact that everyone felt turned upside down, backward, and the opposite. Maybe he didn't have to be so mixed up anymore. I like you a lot, he said at a regular volume. You're pretty, you're funny, and you know how to make my articles look really good on the page. I've always thought you were special, even if I didn't say much about it. And I think you're a great friend, Lucy Herman. At first she didn't say anything. Then, turning away, she walked inside and shut her balcony doors. Jean hung his head. The tentacles, which had a weird connection to his emotions, drooped. With the darkness of Santa Rosa morning in front of him, he walked down the road leading to Highway 10 alone. Jean, it was Lucy's voice behind him. The front door of the Herman house opened. Lucy stepped outside, dressed in a nightgown, a shawl around her shoulders. Thank you, she said. Jean, smiling, smiled. Anytime, he said. He waited a second to let the moment sink in, and then he added, No, let's get your bike because we have to go hide out from the school guidance counselors in Walter Sparrow's old spaceship. What? Really, that final moment would have been a beautiful, if not for one of those black SUVs parked along the curb and a lizard man creeped through the bushes carrying ray guns. That kind of always spoils a good time. End of chapter 21.